Recording. Welcome everyone. My name is Dan Murphy. I'm the program manager for Georgia Commute Options. I want to thank WTS for allowing us to share some of our information and resources with you today. We have the Atlanta chapter president of WTS, Tanya Saxon, on here with us today as well. So I'll hand it over to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at our Wednesday webinar seminars that we're doing. We call it our Webinar Wednesday. We started this back in April, and we've got an overwhelming response. So we've decided to continue to host webinars monthly that are of interest to our members. And we want to thank Georgia Commute Options for allowing for hosting today and coming and talking to us. And I think this is going to be part 2 of a series that we had with Georgia Commute Options. So thanks to the whole team there. I also want to, again, welcome you to the call. To learn more about WTS, please be sure to follow us on our social media platforms. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, and you can also visit our website at WTSatlanta.com. We cannot do none of what we do if it was not for our corporate partners. And our presenting partner for 2020 is Arcadis. And we want to thank Arcadis for being our corporate partner. For Arcadis, I will give you a little bit of history about Arcadis. They are an organization that believe that all women serve as a catalyst to strengthen their community and their organization as an employer of choice. An organization that is committed to fostering and welcoming an inclusive work environment that supports women in career advancement through various programs that encompass the Arcadis Women Network. They help one another to build a stronger and a better high-performing organization. So thanks again to our 2020 presenting partner, Arcadis. We also have our other partners that'll be streaming on the slide, our diamond partners. We want to thank you for your participation. We want to thank you, our platinum partners, our gold partners, our silver partners, our nonprofit partners, and our small business, and also our in-kind partners. If you and your organization would like to become a partner with WTS Atlanta, please feel free to reach out to us via our website at WTSatlanta.com, or you can reach out to me personally, and my information will be at the end of the presentation. At this time, I would like hand it over to Dan, and we'll start our presentation.
Thank you, Tanya. For those who may not be familiar with Zoom, we've got a screenshot here of the Zoom features. For the sake of the presenters, we have muted all participants for the duration of the presentation. There is a chat feature you'll see down there where you can comment though, and there's also the question and answer feature for when if any questions come up during the presentations, we can address those during the Q&A. For the next slide here, just a couple more housekeeping notes. There will be, actually, before we get into the housekeeping notes, if we want to pull up that polling question, there's going to be a couple polls that we take throughout the presentation. So for the first question we have here is your staff experiencing work from home fatigue? This will be a good way for us to, for those who haven't used these polling features before, we can test it out here, and then we'll also gain some insight for Elham as well to see to gauge the pulse of the audience. What we usually do is we'll hold the question up until we get about 70% response, and then we'll show it. So the sooner we get those responses in, sooner we can show the results. So it looks like at least a third expect that their staff is experiencing some form of work fatigue, and a good chunk just might not be sure. Thank you, Art. And then in terms of, for a couple more housekeeping notes I have here, is that the session is going to be recorded, as I mentioned earlier, and then I'll send out a link to the GCO website probably tomorrow morning. So that way you'll be able to access this recording via the GCO website tomorrow. Before I introduce our speaker today, I just want to give a brief introduction on Georgia Commute Options for those who may not know about us. The GCO program is funded by the Georgia Department of Transportation and managed by the Atlanta Regional Commission. We offer incentives and free services to employers, property managers, and commuters to motivate people into trying alternative options rather than driving alone. So whether it's carpooling, van pooling, transit, especially teleworking now, or other clean commute alternatives. For today's presentation on work from home fatigue, we have GCO's resident telework expert, Elham Shirazi. Elham is our FlexWork consultant for GCO. She's got over 30 years of experience in developing telework and flexible schedule programming and is recognized as a leader in the field. Elham has developed resource materials, conducted training workshops, and evaluated the impacts of telework and flexible scheduling for hundreds of organizations across the country, especially many of the employers here in Metro Atlanta. I'm assuming most of us have probably only been working from home full time the last few months, even though it feels like it's been a few years at this point. And so I'll hand it over to Elham now to share some information on how to make that the best of this teleworking opportunity.
Thank you, Dan. And good afternoon to all of you who were kind enough to join us. First of all, I wanted to, on my own behalf, thank WTS, because when I was younger in my career in 1988, actually, I was a secretary on the board of WTS in the LA area chapter, but I also the following year received a scholarship that helped me with my candidacy as a PhD. So believe me, keep those programs going. They really do help women and advance women. So moving forward, I did want to share with you that, there are two different terminologies that are being used. And one of them is work from home, another is telework. And I think that what we've seen under COVID-19 is basically work from home, but not really telework because the situation didn't warrant, for teleworking to happen in a proper manner. But I'm going to talk to that in a few seconds. I think, Ari, we have another poll, if we could please do that. The poll is, what kinds of stress do you think if you know your employees are, having stress from work from home, why do you think that's happening? And if it's multiple choice, so you can, vote for more than one answer. Pick your top three. If we have enough votes, let's show the results. See, more people answered this question. And as we can see, some people might be having isolation, and the way you all voted, it seems like people are overworking and household needs are pressing, are giving employees a little bit of difficulty, as well as childcare, homeschooling, and depression. Of course, all of them came up. But it seems like the top three are overworking, household needs, and isolation. Okay. So basically what happened under COVID-19 is that basically in the span of a week, everybody went home under one roof, and families and household members, everybody was not only working, but some were providing homeschooling and childcare, and some were obviously cooking for more household members and baking, and obviously there was the stress from the pandemic. This is not typical in terms of teleworking. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what teleworking at least was, when we were under different times, It was merely about extending the workplace beyond the traditional office. This could have been the home, or it could have been a co-working center or a branch of your office. A lot of it was work at home, over 95% of it probably. It was voluntary, and it wasn't that everybody could do it. And it was definitely management prerogative and not an entitlement. However, given the spread of COVID-19, obviously we've seen this kind of different type of a program, which is work from home. Let's move. And teleworking was not always full-time. It was not necessarily something that everybody received. It was not a replacement for dependent care. It didn't mean a longer day. It didn't mean not seeing staff, because they would still come to the office in most occasions, at least, you know, a few times a week. And obviously it was not about losing productivity, because whatever you couldn't do at home, you could do in the office. Okay, let's move on. And I just want to give you an overview of what the normal implementation milestones were in a telework setting. And it would start from having management commitment to having someone at the organization in charge of helping pull the program together. There would be a steering committee of HR, IT, facilities, and other departments that were participating in the program. And the job of the steering committee was to develop policies, agreements, and to basically identify, you know, who the participants were, make sure there was adequate technology, have some training in place, and then implement and troubleshoot and evaluate. I just wanted to show you that slide because in the case of the pandemic, everything pretty much became one step. People went home without training, without, the first few days sometimes not having adequate equipment, and all of these adjustments have either happened later or they haven't. And in some cases, companies are going back, adopting policies. We're working with a number of them, or guidelines, to enable companies to have, some of this teleworking continue. And I'll show you some ratios of what we think it looks like on a few slides down. So for teleworking to succeed, the job had to be right, the employee had to be right. Obviously, the technology should have worked, and the manager should have approved. So as we know, a lot of this didn't happen. And, we pretty much had to enable a large group of people, 40 to 50% of the workforce. I actually had seen that it was 42% before, but read another article recently in Forbes where it was estimated that close to 50% of the population is at home working right now. Let's move on. A lot of times there was an eligibility clause where the job had to appropriate, well, it still should. I mean, it is for the non-essential workers who, work in an information gathering type of a job. And, managers were weighing the likelihood of the individual to succeed against some criteria that we introduced. Obviously, past productivity and current productivity really mattered. You couldn't be teleworking unless you had met or exceeded those. And the manager was amenable. Let's move. So here's actually a good picture of what happened, or snapshot of teleworking or work from home. I prefer to call this work from home under COVID, because as you can see, not only the employees went home, well, their pets were home, so they were happier, but then, 55% have significant others, 41% have children. And then, some of the people lower down, like just myself and roommates, some of the issues they're facing is the isolation and, being alone in their own space for days on end. Let's move on. This SHRM survey also asked employees how often they were interrupted. And this was pretty early in the pandemic. And as you can see, the most popular was 0 to 5. And we can also see how video conferencing was very quickly getting adopted during the pandemic, whereby 70% of people do show their faces on video conferencing. And I do want to iterate that this is an important point of keeping contact with the employees. Let's move on. So another important aspect of teleworking is to work ergonomically at home and have a dedicated workspace. And when asked the question of, where are they set up to work, at least for this SHRM survey, the majority had a home office, which is really probably more of an attribute of people in the United States as opposed to other countries in the world, that people might have another room that they can dedicate to teleworking. But 30% were working on the dining table, which is very difficult because you're sharing that with other household members, and it doesn't lend itself to focus, or the couch or bed, or other locations. Ergonomically, it is not optimal to work on the couch or in bed, because those positions can cause discomfort in the long run. And we'll go through ergonomics in a few seconds as well. Okay, so this is a CNBC survey of swing states. And when people were asked what were they doing when they were saving time from not commuting, as you can see, the most popular under COVID is spending time with family, followed by relaxing, sleeping, and hobbies, and working more. But I think over time, again, this was done on April 17th and 18th. I think we're seeing some more changes as summer has come. A lot of kids are not in camp. That obviously people are still spending time with family, but we're also hearing through our focus groups that people are having a hard time unplugging from work. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. Okay, let's move on. Korn Ferry did a survey too, and based on their survey, 77% of people were finding it hard to concentrate, and the reasons cited were obviously the media and the news, worrying about people and families, worrying about the virus, and trying to work with with kids who are also present in the home environment. Okay, let's move on. So basically, of the group that are teleworking, about, whatever that is, a chunk of 42%, at least for this particular survey by CNBC, about half of them wanted to work either entirely or more from home. And about, 55% of the group, a quarter wanted to work entirely or more. And over 50% wanted to head back to the office. I think heading back to the office is definitely an indication of wanting to go back to a normal situation. And as we know, that has become more and more unfeasible as the pandemic has become stronger and more widespread in the United States. However, 60% reported as being either productive or more productive when they were working from home. Go to the next one. People's concerns, again, this is a different survey, very much similar to the other one. As you can see, here the distractions are by TV and media, which is something we have to definitely tell employees to just, not watch or not listen to while they're working. Just concerns about human interaction, at-home childcare, and just lack of social interaction as a parent. Let's move on. So I think this final survey, I think that I'm reviewing, it's not the last one, but there's one later, showed that 73% of 7,000 employees surveyed by Monster were experiencing some mental stress symptoms such as nightmares, loss of focus, depression, anger. Close to 30% had physical stress. And, I obviously this situation is not a relaxing situation. However, had we had to go to the office, I think it would have been a lot more stressful. And, a majority of people think that stress and anxiety are affecting their job productivity. Okay, let's move on. So, as I mentioned, organizations didn't take steps to train employees, to, train managers as to what they should do in this situation. And basically, in a state of panic, everybody went home. Some employees came back to the office, picked up equipment, some didn't. And some employers even allowed employees to take furniture home during COVID-19, such as a good chair. The right direction to have right now is to have a program that allows for business continuity, while we still live under COVID-19. However, I think it's a good time to pause, if you haven't as an organization, to make your program a little bit more well-planned and thoughtful. And I'm going to go into detail as to what some of this planning is about. Next slide, please. I think very importantly, while a lot of organizations have adopted teleworking for the purposes of business continuity. Am I muffled? If I am, please let me know. It seems like one person had a problem. Okay. And I am not sure what's going on with my connection. Okay, some people are saying it's clear and some people are saying it's not. So thank you so much for responding. So it might be the connection from the other side. Yeah, majority are saying I sound fine. Okay, so going back to developing the case for teleworking, I think it would be a good idea for organizations also to think through, what are some other reasons for which their business may want to continue teleworking, or what are some of the reasons that can help build a better business case for them, so that the organization keeps this practice in place, at least for those who want to, and for those who have been very productive and don't necessarily need to be in the office every day. So productivity always comes through, even though people are concerned and stressed. I think they're doing their due diligence, and as we saw and how you voted, a lot of employees are working longer. Obviously, teleworking is key to flexibility. All the younger age demographics point to millennials, younger generations looking for this as a way to recruit some of those employees. We have recently been talking to some organizations that are even considering teleworking for recruiting from other areas, not only full-time workers, but also part-time workers. So it expands the span of what's available to an organization. Obviously, it is a big morale booster. We've done a number of focus groups and roundtable meetings. And what comes out very clear is that the commuters in Atlanta do not miss the commute. That's for sure. And they, in fact, love the fact that they're saving about 1 to 3 hours of time on a daily basis. A lot of organizations are also looking at what that overhead savings may look like. Do they need all the space, that they have, or are they able to cut back, on their footprint and maybe save some money? And obviously, saving money could equate to giving employees some kind of a stipend or, advance for getting themselves better equipped for teleworking. And obviously the reduction of stress and commuting hours, as I mentioned, stands out, in a huge way. Let's go to the next one. One of the principles of teleworking is to transition from managing by presence to managing productivity. And managers need to be very goal-oriented. They need to work with employees so they can develop, lists of their expectations. What are the deliverables? What's the timing? They should, be on top of providing training and oversight. In fact, a lot of managers are telling us that they're better managers because they're teleworking, because they need to know more about what the employees are doing. And this feedback should be given on an ongoing, as part of an ongoing process. In fact, a lot of organizations say, we do goal setting and deliverables, all that, on a weekly, monthly basis. We don't wait for the annual evaluation to have discussions about it. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is a survey also by SHRM. And, a lot of people still question, how is productivity measured? I think, again, more and more employers and supervisors are coming on board because they've been practicing teleworking for so long. I mean, it's been definitely since March. So, this is probably the longest time we even expected to be at home working, and it may stretch further. But as you can see, there were, topical answers. It was a close-ended survey, and you can see that, multiple responses were allowed. And the number one issue that stood out in terms of measuring productivity while employees are working from home or teleworking was how quickly people respond to emails, how quickly they return phone calls, but also very close to that, having specific goals and parameters. And as you can see, what I really wanted to point out, actually, I think number 4 is important because, it really goes back to the fact that, we manage teleworkers the same way we manage in-office workers or on-site employees. And really, it's, how do we know when work is being done at the office? It's really going back to the same measures. However, down at the bottom of the, this particular table, you see that only 9% monitored employees via software. And although this has popped up a few times here and there in the media, but also we've picked it up in our interaction with companies. If a manager has to watch when people log on and off, this is a waste of a manager's time. And it's really not a method to record productivity. It should go back to deliverables and goals. Let's move to the next slide, please. So it's really important that organizations have some kind of a policy or a contract or guideline in place to, first of all, be safe in terms of making sure the message is the same, both from managers and employees, and they're receiving the same information. Policies or contracts or guidelines allow companies to accommodate larger numbers of people to telework, and there are some pitfalls with teleworking. So, and those could be the legal pitfalls, but they have not been a showstopper. I'm going to go over those. Obviously, as an employer, you want to be transparent, and you want to make sure that this solution works and continues in some form or fashion after COVID-19. It's going to be hard to imagine, Atlanta getting as congested as it was before if we don't take the appropriate actions. And of course, your attorneys have to weigh in. Let's do another poll here. And I'm just curious to see how many of you have a written contract, policy, or guideline in place. Okay, I think, was that sufficient time to show the responses? Great, 65% of you do. So you are in an advanced type of an environment, and however, close to 35% either don't or they're unsure. And I think this is something that's very important, and that organizations should have some minimum guidelines and make sure that employees are aware of them. So let's move to the next slide. Typically, having a policy correlates directly with the size of the employer. The larger the employer size, the more likely they are to have a policy in place. You're an unusual group, but this might be due to COVID, because prior to the pandemic, only 42% of firms had some kind of guidelines, and the majority did not really have anything written, or people were unsure. So I think there's some progress already that has been made, at least with the group that's attending this webinar. Let's move on. So what are some legalities? I'm going to go over these quickly, but you can always go to our website later and ask for help. We have templates, and we can help you develop policies in cases that you don't. We are not attorneys, so we do want to make sure that you check with your attorneys. And I want to say from the outset that none of these have been a showstopper. The federal government has been teleworking since the 80s, and now there is an executive order, which is a law, that requires all federal employees to have the ability to telework. And it has been in place for a number of years. And so some of the legalities to consider are your wage and hours law, especially your federal and your FSLA category, which means that your hours for non-exempt workers should not exceed 40 in a given 5-day work week. And if there's overtime to be incurred, obviously they need to get prior approval from their managers, and that you have a way to record this. Workers' comp applies when people work at home. However, employers limit their liability by saying that it has to be at a dedicated workspace. So that's part of the ergonomics I'll talk about very quickly in a few more slides. OSHA does not expect employers to conduct home inspections. Some employers, rarely I find one that does that inspection, but I can tell you that so far it has not been happening, and I think under COVID it might be very difficult. ADA and FMLA do not require telework to be an accommodation. However, if on the HR side you decide that it's okay, it's usually handled on the ADA side or FMLA, and not in the context of a telework policy. It's also important that you describe your terms and terminology very correctly, so it doesn't lead to being discriminatory. And so you never want to say teleworking is a perk or a privilege. You want to make sure that it's a workplace strategy, and it's not to create haves and have-nots. Are any of these a showstopper? They haven't been. And the good news is on the workers' comp side, we haven't had that many cases, so this has not become a litigious area thus far. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what's included in a policy or a guideline? Typically, you have your goals, the selection criteria, what the arrangements are, how often people can telework, what's the frequency, and how does it work with scheduling. It does require people to be, answering phones, emails, texts. There's a discussion of workers' comp. What are the resources? Very importantly, defining, the telephony, the technology. Some organizations provide equipment, some don't. Let employees use their own. And in cases when they let employees use their own, a lot of times they come up with minimum requirements. And insurance, usually insurance of the equipment, obviously the employees' insurance, both on their homeowners and the insurance from their organization remains untouched. You know, if the employer provides the equipment, they insure it, and there are rules about having this dedicated workspace and making sure that their work doesn't impact the non-teleworkers. Let's move on to the next slide. We also encourage employers to have a telework form. You can call this an MOU, you can call this an agreement, assignment, many different terms have been used, that tailors the teleworking to the individual employee. So it says, you know, how long it will last, what are the dates, and obviously in this, you know, time period, we don't know. But it's also good to have an idea of what the hours are. And obviously this becomes a little bit more easy, a little easier once we, you know, have a normal situation or whatever the, you know, this will look like. But the more we can get employees to define their core hours, where, you know, they can be available is critical. And then, you know, just some other detail. So let's move on. And by the way, a lot of times employers have this form filled out annually and signed annually, just to make sure nothing has changed. So offering flexibility does help retain employees. As you can see, that probability is higher with younger employees than with older employees. But the younger employees, as we know, are much more likely to job hop. And, you know, the older employees, I don't want to at all, you know, connotate that we're older, but, you know, in the higher age groups, you know, probably are just, you know, we're waiting for retirement. Actually, teleworking offers a really good situation for hiring part-time retired people back into the workforce. Okay, so let's move on. A lot of employees, you know, obviously are happy that they can telework under the current situation. They support their, you know, managers' mandate, and the confidence in terms of efficiency, you know, is higher. You know, they feel about 60% of them feel that they're confident they can do their job effectively, and 50% believe that they're equally or more productive from the home versus at the office. Okay, let's move on. Recently, Georgia Commute Options did a survey in the Metro Atlanta region, and as you can see, this survey was completed up to May 5th, and there were different surveys. There were executive, there were focus groups with executive leadership. Then there were surveys with with people who are working at home, and also which were the, you know, non-manager, and the managers, which were 21%. So, and the response size was very impressive. So one of the things that we see is that prior to COVID, on average, people were working from home about a day. During COVID, that has changed to actually, you know, almost full time, but the sweet spot and the desired future looks like it's 2.5 days. And this is coming up in a lot of the focus groups and surveys that I've seen in other places, that many employers are thinking that in the future, whenever that's going to be, they will migrate to 2 to 3 days of, you know, either in office or at home, to have this more, you know, open policy towards teleworking. So some employees don't even see a need to come back. Some managers don't, but some employees, you know, want to come back. When you look at the top 3 positive aspects, obviously people love saving money. They're not spending money on lunch and gas and all that, and they're not as stressed and they have more time for family. On the negative side, they're finding it, and you can see that on the, on the left-hand side at the bottom, the most popular were struggling to unplug, anxious about health, and, distractions. So let's move on. And based on the surveys with the executives, what this showed, based on a survey of about 12, CEO level executives, about 70% think their employees will work more from home. So that's really positive. We do want to, make sure that we make a change. More employees will work full-time at home. And as you can see, that we will make it easier for employees to work from home in case of future emergencies. I think the whole wave will be towards, having, opening up the doors for greater teleworking, when we get to a safer type of an environment. Let's move on. So what are some tips for teleworkers in case your teleworkers went home? You never had time to train them. We do offer training modules, but it's very important that even if people are not doing this now, that they're reminded to have a morning ritual, start at a certain time, get dressed, not dressed up, get out of their PJs, have virtual breaks, make sure they get breaks, move around, eat lunch away from their desks, go for walks, if needed, meditate. Make sure that on their schedules, they do document what's their personal non-available time. So if a family, two people in the same household are switching childcare duties, then it should be, we should be able to see that on their Outlook schedule or whatever they have, that mornings may not be a best time to reach them, or afternoons may not be optimal. Obviously, you want to tell them to stay away from the news, have an end of the day ritual. And this last one is a very big one that's coming up now in the literature, and that is people should take vacation time or personal time off, from working all the time and managing their needs, because they do need a good break in order to refresh. And employees are hesitant to do that because they want to save their vacation time. But again, it's just a good idea to remind them. Let's move on. So we did talk about having a dedicated workspace. We talked about having a routine. And we can skip this slide now. And for ergonomics, it's very important that they have a dedicated space. They have a good chair on rollers with supportable back and armrest. Their lighting is adequate. They should be reading actually at chin level, not at eye level. And there are a few more factors here. Basically, you want to make sure they have the same ergonomic training, that, they have fire extinguishers around, that they don't, put too many things on the wall plugs, and they have a surge protector, and to the degree possible to work in a space that has minimal noise. Again, this might be hard right now because of many people being under the same roof, but eventually the more employees can create a space around their teleworking, the better easier it gets and less stressful it gets to get their work done. Let's move. And of course, you do want to still continue training your family and friends. I'm at home, I'm working, set rules for office materials. Your office laptop should not be accessible by others in the household, or other materials that you've brought home. And, I think it's really imperative that managers and employees have a discussion about, when you have an employee has personal needs versus work needs, to try to create those two separate spaces with, the employees' buy-in. Let's move on. And generally, it's good to track some of the experiences on productivity, on technology, benefits and advantages, overall satisfaction. You know, at the beginning of this survey, I realized that, you know, a lot of you were unsure about how employees were feeling towards fatigue as a result of work from home. And it's really important that managers ask employees questions. You know, how are you doing? Are you working on the top subjects you like? You know, where do you need help? Really do have more of a check-in with the employees. Let's move on, please. And I'm going to definitely be done in a few minutes. So a few quick tips for managers. Let's go on, please. So obviously, I think we've all learned that 15-minute huddle is very helpful virtually, or a stand-up on certain days where employees can talk about what they're doing. Trust is critical. You should have more trust in your teleworkers if you're managers by now. Let's move on. And you know, we want to make sure that employees have work-life balance, that they are, you know, asking for help as they have problems, especially regarding work issues as they arise. And it really does, teleworking and working from home makes a case about being a little bit more involved with the employees, but that seems to be a positive aspect for the managers. Let's move on. Here's some ideas for boosting morale and collaboration and employee engagements. If you're not doing these, think about them. They could be birthday celebrations, water cooler get-togethers. A lot of companies have those. Virtual icebreakers, coffee, lunchtime meeting, virtual town hall. As you can see, there are other examples, but also some companies have set up intranets to support employees' pictures while they're teleworking, pictures with pets, pictures with families, exchange of recipes. These aspects seem to be extremely important in making sure that employees, you know, stay involved and they, you know, are involved with their coworkers and their managers. Okay, let's move on. So obviously health and wellness, very important. You know, these are, as you can see, these are just some suggestions, but, you know, very important to make sure that employees follow, you know, some of these. And let's go on to the next slide. What can managers do? Empathy is the top of this list. You know, we need to be open to the difficulties in people's lives. You know, we're all in the same storm, but different boats, and we should be aware of that. People without children have other issues than people with children at home. You know, you want to ask employees questions about what they like doing, what they enjoy doing, maybe which teams they like to work on. As a manager, a weekly video conference may give you an idea if an employee is feeling isolated or lonely. If they're working overtime, send them an email sometimes. If you see it, say, you know, maybe you should take a break or you should stop, because you don't want, you know, work to get into deep hours of the night, and employees then really do, you know, feel very constrained. And make sure that your HR program, you know, confirms that they are available to have support for the employees. I think I have just one more and I'm done. Actually, Dan, it's back to you.
Thanks, Ilham.
Sure.
Well, I love your analogy of the same storm, different boats. Right now, that's so true. In terms of some additional resources for GCO, I mentioned this before, but we are going to send a follow-up email with the website to access the recordings at the GCO website. And there you'll also be able to find additional resources. One of the things that we did right when COVID-19 was really starting to take shape and affect employers is we came up with this FlexWork for Business Continuity Quick Start Guide in terms of telework resources. And so you'll be able to download that guide on the website. A meeting I had earlier today one of the things that was discussed were some employers who've taken their employee workforce and brought them to work have actually had to recall and send folks back home. So again, this might be a resource that is helpful for your organization, and we'll also be having future resources in the coming months. The other thing too is one of the things in terms of ACT, the Association of Commuter Transportation, on the website we have specific recommendations for different transportation areas and resources that are on the website as well. For our next slide here, the last thing I have before we get into the Q&A feature is we've got a QR code, and then also if we can post the link in the chat for our post survey. There's only about 5 or 6 questions. It'll just take a few minutes, but we really appreciate any feedback we can get from you all. So if you could please take the time to fill out that survey as we're going over the Q&A. And I think I mentioned here, but the QR code, all you gotta do is pull up your smartphone with the camera, and it will zoom right in that QR code, and it'll automatically pull up a box to take you to that survey. So with that, I will now, for those questions we have, if we want to raise up the Q&A, we can start to answer some questions.
I guess, yeah, the question is, being asked that if we're talking about 2 to 3 days of teleworking, what impact does that have on savings, especially regarding to facilities? A lot of employers are right now investigating the possibility of reducing space, but providing, some resident space at maybe a facility moving on, meaning for, employees that have to be there or are not having an easy time teleworking. And then that there would be some hoteling space, which would be nomadic, meaning that it would be shared, maybe, and actually this was happening in the workplace before, where, employees have to check in once a week or twice a week, that they would reserve that space. And obviously, that space would have to be cleaned thoroughly on a daily basis. So hoteling is definitely, becoming at the top of the list. Right now, people don't feel safe hoteling because, the virus is still here. But hopefully, as we drift towards a safer future, that becomes possible. A lot of offices are also outfitting their space differently, so that there's plexiglass, around the work area, and that cleaning is being done twice a day in order to, help create some of those situations. And obviously the savings for employees will go down too. In a hoteling environment, the employer can minimize their space at least by, sometimes 20, 30, 40%, 50%. The federal government had programs like that before, where employees were only required to come in the office twice a month. And other private sector employers did. But employees also save, because even not having to drive in Atlanta's commute 3 times a week is a huge saving to people. So let's see, any other questions?
Real quick, Elham, one of the things that we put here in the chat, we opened this, WTS allowed us to invite other people in the GCO network to attend this session. So if you do have more information on, or if you would like more information about WTS, we put Tanya's email in here so you can reach out to her. One of the questions that popped up were, are employee engagement activities effective? So is there any activities that you would recommend, Elham?
Actually, all of the ones that were on the list, they're extremely popular. And, some of your employees may not get into it, but, companies have really taken this on strongly, because during this time where, even if you go to the office, you can't really congregate in a conference room or in the coffee area. Employees and managers, everybody needs a place to get together And actually getting to know people's environments has been very helpful to people having a deeper understanding and respect for what other people are doing in the workplace. So I highly recommend them. If they're not on your list, start testing out a few.
Thank you. So one question that came in a private chat to me was, what should I do, or what can I advise and share with the managers on what to do with employees that are overworking?
First of all, you want your managers to be aware of it. So they do recognize it if they're on a video, and they can see from mannerisms and gestures, how people are doing. They can see by when they're sending email messages, when they're responding, to kind of getting an idea. So first of all, detect it. Second, talk about it. Ask them what's going on, how are you feeling, have empathy. And then third, try to give them some limits and boundaries. And, if they live alone, obviously it's easier to say work from this time to this time, and don't get online after this time. But if they have a mixed type of a situation, then talk with them to figure out how is the best way to divide up their time during the day between work and home.
All right. So far, I don't see any more questions. I'll give it a little more time here to see if we have anything else. All right, looks like that's going to be it. Thank you, Ilham, again for taking the time to be able to share your information and a lot of your resources with us today. Also, special thanks to Tanya for inviting GCO to have us and share this information. And with that, I hope you all have a great day. Stay healthy and safe.